All right. Welcome, everyone. Fabulous to have you filing in tonight. I'll begin. It's a little odd sometimes when there's a webinar on. I'll begin with the end in mind. Normally, when I run an online webinar for our parent communities in our Real Schools partner schools, I like to finish with gratitude for you giving up a slice of your Tuesday evening that you could choose to do something else with. I'm going to start there. I've been quite amazed, and in a really positive way, to get a message from one of our admin team here at Real Schools this afternoon that we had, I think at last count, something like 91 or 93 parents who had registered to come along this evening and to find out about this topic. And that's rare. And so I want to congratulate you for being a rare breed as you enter the room today. It is, and with my former principal hat on, it is so valuable to have a parent community out there who are interested enough to, I guess, put some time aside to find out how they can partner with the school to do something as important as building resilience in young people. So I think it's fabulous that you registered. We are recording the webinar today. So to give you the flight attendant spiel before we do kick off, we're recording because for anybody who isn't able to make it today, we want to make sure that you're able to catch up if you registered and didn't get it. So we're going to make sure that comes through and to make sure that this video comes through as a resource to the school. There's a little disclaimer that comes with that as well, which means that part of the flight attendant briefing here is that you can interact in the webinar today. So you'll see my eyes darting around because I'm checking. I'm having a look at whether, for instance, anybody's done something like use the chat box, use the Q&A section that you can sometimes find in the Zoom software that you've got available on your device. And I can also even do things like put your hand up. So the disclaimer is just be careful because we are recording that if you get up and say, my kid, Bill Smith, or who's in year 3 at the school always does this, be aware that other people might watch this video at some stage. But if you want to talk broadly about some of the issues because I'm going to be really honest, it's really tough to be a parent these days, then please know you can interact. This isn't parenting or educational Netflix. To prove that we're interactional, let me see if I can do that weird thing where I'm going to completely out of the blue and without warning. I'll see if I can unmute Anna Maria and see if there's anything that you would like to say, Anna Maria, to intro this session and to kick things off this evening. So let me see if this works. How'd I go, Anna Maria? Are you there? You got me?
Yes.
Oh, how good are we? Hey, we made this work first go.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hello, Adam, and hello, all our families who have joined us tonight. I'm thrilled to hear that number of people have joined. That really, gives me a great feeling. And it is a privilege to, teach and lead all of your gorgeous children and to have built relationships with you tonight. So it's great that we have you here, Adam, and we look forward to seeing you on Thursday in person at our school. So have a great time enjoying Adam and his amazing knowledge.
Awesome, fabulous. I could see that one person found the hand up button and then quickly found the hand down button. So congratulations. Thanks, Anna Maria. I'm really looking forward to meeting all your students and all your staff again on Thursday. I've been working with the school for a while now. And implementing an approach called restorative practices with the school. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. But one of the reasons that we want to implement this approach in the school is because we have this ambition around installing resilience in our young people. And the good part about that is that it's a shared ambition. There's barely a parent group that we meet anywhere around the country that says, I wouldn't mind that for my kid. I like the idea. And depending on what sort of definition that you've got in your head about what resilience is, it's usually almost a little colloquial. It's almost like that ability to kind of fall off the horse or the bike, as the picture you can see on the screen, dust yourself off and get back on and have another go. And with that in mind, I want to ask you, do you think we might have a problem? Do you think that there might be some compromise in the resilience levels of our young people at the moment and in recent years? And when I ask that question, and by the way, you don't have to answer, this isn't school where you have to provide a test. But if you want to put your answer in the chat box, do you think we have a problem with the resilience levels of our young people, or make a comment, feel free. And I'll be keeping an eye on that as we go. And what most parents around Australia that we're meeting are telling us is that they are a little concerned about their kids' ability to do that. And I think that it has been exacerbated by the interruptions around the pandemic. And it's certainly true that some of our kids who are working and learning in primary schools at the moment are doing so having experienced a period where their ability to interact with other people has kind of fall off the bike. Socially, academically, has been a bit denied to them for a little while, or at least the volume of interactions like that have been denied. And so I think that it's been sped up or exacerbated a little bit. But if I'm really honest, and I'm showing my age a little bit now, but my kids are older. They're 22 and 19 now. I reckon I was seeing it in them well before the pandemic. I think that it's something that we've had a slow, steady creep on for some time. The best working definition that I've heard around what resilience actually is comes from a really clever fellow who, for the educators in the audience tonight, will be familiar with, called Andrew Fuller, who says that resilience is the ability to thrive despite risk. And I really like that, because the two key components of Fuller's definition kind of work interchangeably. They need each other. And so when we say, first of all, to thrive, that's the ability to do well. It's the ability to succeed. It's the ability to make progress despite risk, the second part, which is often the bit that we neglect to provide our kids the opportunity to experience. So one of the things that happens sometimes if we remove all the risks from the path of our kids is that they don't get the ability to, for instance, even fall off the bike. We had a thought about this when I had an opportunity many years ago to do something that most of you have done, and certainly that Anna Maria has done, which was to open a brand new school as its inaugural principal. And we had a decision to make about our preschool. I did my school was in Darwin, and sometimes living in Melbourne now, as I do in May, I pine for Darwin with the weather that we're starting to experience now. We had a decision to make around our preschool, where the designers of the preschool had put a little bike track in for the kid, and they'd arranged for the kids to have some trikes, and they were going to be able to cycle around this almost oval track. And they put in front of us the surfaces for it. And they said it was either going to be a softball surface or a simple pebble mix type surface. And it took a fair bit of work. It took a little bit of thinking, but through the help of a really clever designer who was insistent that the kids were needed to learn how to be resilient in the way, even in their riding of a bike. He insisted that we don't choose one or the other, that we have a mixture of a number of different surfaces. And so we put some softball in, we put some gravel in. We even had a bit where there was some logs, and it was really uneven as they went. There were some cobblestones, there was some grass, and there were all sorts of different surfaces that made it actually quite difficult for the kids to ride the bike around the bike track. And they loved it. They loved the challenge of that. And we forget sometimes that there's a fun part to risk. There's an exciting part to risk. And the bit that is exciting is the learning bit, is the growth part, is the thriving part that Fuller's referring to. And so what the school's looking to do as one of its outcomes and features of working restoratively, as I'm helping them learn about, is to be able to put the right level of risks in front of young people so they can thrive and build resilience. Some of the risks we put in front of them are obvious. As teachers, we're working really hard all the time to put academic risk in front of your young people. The job of being a teacher from an academic point of view is pretty much just try to keep as many kids as possible the longest period of time in the narrow window between too hard and too easy in their learning. You don't get to learn resilience by doing work that you've already mastered over and over and over again. It's hard to also get resilient if the task is impossible. We want the task to be a bit risky. We want it to be something that I could do if I really apply myself, but I'm not sure if I can. And I'm going to have that go at it, is what we're trying to do. Another thing that we try to do around this resilience is put social risk in front of the kids, which means that you'll find sometimes that your kids might come home from school and say that one of the things they did today at school was their teacher asked them to solve a problem, maybe a playground scrap or a difference of agreement in another student about who owns the red texter on the table. The teacher might have asked them to do it themselves. Solve the problem yourselves under my supervision. And the teacher might tell them, these are the ways that we think we could solve problems. And for instance, one of those is that we go past, present, future in the way that we solve problems. The old way that most of us experienced when we were at school is to go really past. We do a full forensic investigation. And I sort of laughed at the teachers. It's like we have to launch an episode of Education CSI every time we can't be sure about whose red texter it is. We call witnesses and build a full forensic brief and then try to make a judgment. And the truth is, even with all that evidence, we're still guessing. We don't know. We don't know. And as a result, we end up treating young people unfairly and leave them less likely to trust the systems we put in place. So what we want to do is get them to trust the system. And the best way to do that is to let them experience it themselves. Sometimes they come up with an outcome that we weren't expecting. But what we do is show them how to, first of all, understand, well, how did the red texter get here? How is the fact that we're disagreeing making people feel? And what are we going to do? How are we going to design a way of working that can help us move forward and get better? And one of the other things we do is model. So we want to be able to, and this is something that as parents and educators we can do together, is model to our kids the ways that we can thrive despite risk. We can tell them what's going through our head when risks and when challenges and when barriers present, and tell them how we're going to try and get around it and have another go at it. I know one teacher who tells me that she has one deliberate technology failure every term. And it's for the very purpose of being able to show her students that she lets them know we're going to watch a really exciting video or do a really exciting game after recess, and then forgets to include a cable in her bag or something like that. And what she does is she demonstrates to the students what she's thinking while her plans fall apart, because she wants them to replicate that thinking and their ability to be able to overcome the fact that they're not getting a video today. And she actually designs for that to happen. So part of what we can do together is to design for the right level of risk to be put in front of young people so that they can learn to thrive themselves wherever they possibly can. And that's how we get the concept of resilience going for ourselves. One of the, as I mentioned, role models are really valuable, and you and I are really valuable role models to your kids, but they're not always the ones they choose. And so one of the things that we've discovered that can be really helpful is to establish with young people who are their resilience role models. And I thought about something because over the years, what I've done is run resilience projects with kids and ask them to find their resilience hero in their project. And when they get past the first obvious ones of choosing Harry Styles or some Kardashian, and a little bit of painstaking pointing out by me that there's nothing all that particularly resilient in quite a few of those stories, we tell them that what we're looking for is the qualities of resilience. We let them know what they are. I'll give you a couple of those in a minute, and then ask them to work backwards towards people who've demonstrated those. The NBA finals are on at the moment, and a lot of kids are a little engrossed in that event in the US. And I've had kids as part of their resilience hero project before come and tell me that Michael Jordan's a good example. And I've asked them why. When has Michael Jordan shown resilience? And a young person brought me, a once a year 4 student brought me a quote that he'd found on Google that Michael Jordan had said, where he said he'd taken in his career 9,000 shots that had missed, and he'd lost 300 games. And 26 times, Michael Jordan, who was known as the quintessential winner, he was the clutch player. He's the player that when the game is on the line and your team's a point down and there's only 4 seconds to go, he's the player that they get the ball to and expect to win the game for them. There's actually a quote by a coach from the Chicago Bulls in Michael Jordan's early days where they asked him, what do you do? When you get into that situation and you've got 4 seconds on the clock and you're 1 point behind. And he said, we run a very special play. And I said, what's that? He said, we get the ball to Michael and everybody else gets the F out of the way. And so he's made it very clear that he's going to give this person the responsibility. And Jordan's quick to point out that 26 times he has been given that responsibility and missed. And he says that's why he succeeds. Now, I asked this year 4 boy, so what story does that tell you about being resilient? What do you think's going on? And he said, I was thinking, he said, if he missed a couple in a row, he said he must be really nervous when they get to the next time and they come in for the timeout and the coach kind of looks at him as though you're going to do it. And he goes, there must have been a part of him that didn't want to. There must have been a part of him that thought, I'm going to pass the ball to Scottie Pippen this time, and get someone else to take that shot. But he somehow found an ability to be able to accept that risk of missing again, maybe the 3rd, 4th time in a row, and thrive anyway, to have another go. I had a shock as well when I ran resilience, a hero project once, when a girl came to me and said she wanted to make her hero project Winston Churchill. And I said, why? And how did this happen? And what's going on here? Because somehow in my head, I had this picture of Winston Churchill as being the guy that was the Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War II, but drank through most of it. And she gave me a quote again that she'd gone and researched, where Churchill had said that success is not final, failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts. And I said, what do you think that means? And she said, well, she'd been thinking about that example of falling off a bike or a horse, and how it's the courage it's being brave about just getting back on, even though you might hurt yourself again, is what she took from that quote. And I didn't have an argument then. I hoped that when she did her project, there wouldn't be too much about the 10 a.m. whiskey drinking that Churchill was doing. But, and luckily there wasn't, but she had picked up on the key theme that we were talking about, which is incredibly important. And I started to get students who would come to me with heroes like Emma Watson and Jessica Watson. The other one was in Harry Potter, I think, Jessica Watson. And I distinctly remember a year 3 girl describing to me why she chose Jessica Watson. And she said it was not because there were many pictures that she could find of Jessica Watson about to go and be the youngest person to ever solo circumnavigate the globe in a sailboat, in a yacht. And I said, what makes you want to choose her? She goes, I was thinking that there must have been a time when everyone was in Sydney Harbour when she left, and there was lots of boats around her, and all her friends are there and they're wishing her luck, and there's TV cameras, and it's all very exciting, and she's going to go and do this wonderful thing. And she said she must have sailed out and been looking back, and I can still see them all, and they're all there to support me. And she said there must have been a time when she looked back and she couldn't see them anymore. And she said that's when she would have needed her resilience. That's when she would have needed to step up. And what we can do is start to take examples like this, people that they can see in the world who aren't necessarily famous for their luck, but for their ability to thrive despite risk. And we can make role models out of them and identify the behaviours and the thinking that they demonstrate. And also we can do it in our lives for our young people more than any other quality. Resilience is a really valuable commodity when modelled by people who the young person rates really highly. So what are those indicators? What are those things that allow us to say, yep, that's a resilient young person? So chiefly what we talk about, and this is a really important point, we need to break the language down here, an appropriate mix of pride and determination. Now, what the research tells us is that word appropriate is really important, because when you think about concepts like pride and determination, we think about them often as being things that you can't have enough of. It's almost, I don't know about you, it almost feels sometimes like I need to say this in an American accent. And I hope that I'm not about to offend or annoy any American families who might be in the audience tonight. But this notion of you've got to be proud of yourself, you've got to be proud of yourself no matter what, I think is one that we should challenge. I don't know about you, but I can remember really old expressions like pride comes before a fall. And what they're reminding us is that about that expression like that is that pride stuff, be careful. You can have too much of it. You can tip over from pride into being boastful and being arrogant really quickly. And then the world is going to teach you a really harsh lesson. And I think that en masse, when we let our young people know that you need to be proud no matter what, I think we lead them in the wrong direction in this regard. We lead them to a hyperinflated sense of self-esteem that is in a lot of ways the opposite of being resilient. There's some evidence around this, and it's really concerning evidence that recently, for over the last about 6 to 7 years, the US education system has been producing young people who have been at elementary or primary school level, as well as a high school level, leaving en masse as a whole population, performing worse than the generations and the groups that have come, years that have come before them. It's the very first time in American history that we've had a dip in the education standard of young people stepping out into the world. So they're not doing all that well, but their self-esteem scales are through the roof. They think they're awesome, and they're not. And so what we need is for young people to, sure, we want you to be proud, but we want you to attach it to something. We want you to anchor it to something. And what we want to anchor it to is effort, is having a go. Even when you don't get the result you're looking for, even when risk presents, even when barriers are in your way. We want you to be determined, sure, but we want you to be proud of the fact that you had a go continually, not just because you can draw breath. So it's a really important distinction there, and that's something that we know in resilient people is they don't have a conflated ability of self. They're confident and determined, but not to the extent of believing that they're amazing without having to try. The second thing they exemplify is what we often refer to as a never give up attitude. There was a really fabulous, there was an award that was given several years ago. It was actually given about 30 or 40 years ago now. The New York Times ran a survey, and they asked the American people for the most resilient character in American literature or fiction. And so they were allowed to choose from books, they were allowed to choose from magazines, from movies, from TV shows. And the nomination that won was the Coyote from the Roadrunner cartoons. If you're anywhere near my age, you'll remember that one. They went a step further, and they actually asked the American people why they nominated this person. And the clear answer that came back was two things. One was, first of all, the never give up attitude of the Coyote. Every single episode of the Roadrunner was built around the Coyote's resilience. Nothing happens in a Roadrunner cartoon if the Coyote gives up. So it was this never give up attitude. And the second thing that they mentioned was that he never tried the same strategy twice. He always attacked the idea of catching the Roadrunner in a different way. Now, if you go and look it up, the people at Looney Tunes, when the award was bestowed upon the Coyote, they created one cartoon where the Coyote catches the Roadrunner. It's not quite what you anticipate, in that there's an issue which means the Coyote can't actually eat the Roadrunner because the Roadrunner is enormous and the Coyote shrinks. But nevertheless, he catches him. And they did that to congratulate the Roadrunner on the Coyote on his brilliant win. The other thing that we know around resilient young people is that they have a clear and articulated, which means they say it. They get that most struggles that we face are temporary. Most of the things in life that we have to confront don't stay the way they are as acute and painful forever. So even the notion of, for instance, losing a loved one in the family, it's really hard at first, but the pain does subside over time, and people can get back to work, school, play, laughing, living, despite that horrible risk being put in front of them. Financial challenges that we face as adults, while they may be ongoing, they come and go a bit. And they do disappear a little bit as we go. And for our kids, they might think that they could never get past the challenge of being able to add fractions, but they will. They'll work it out. And they understand, these kids, that most of these difficulties in life that come along that we have to be tough about and that we have to be resilient about are going to go away at some stage. We will overcome them. And they don't default into the language of never. The language of I'll never be able to do this. They know also that the path to success whenever those challenges come along is perseverance. So there's a really strong connection for young people around that's a little bit coyote-ish, that says that, well, if I want to hit this problem and solve it, I'll just try away. And then I'll probably need to move around a little bit to another angle and come at it from a different direction. Or maybe that didn't work. I might try the other side of this problem and come at it a completely different way. But they know that coming at the problem multiple times is probably the key. It's probably the key to unlocking it at some stage. And the other thing that they have, young people who are resilient, is extensive support networks. And I wonder if I may to just explore that with you a minute, because it seems a little odd, doesn't it, that they kind of have a network where there's lots of help. So there's an activity that we do with young people sometimes to help them identify the resilience and how they can actually find people in their lives who can help them to be able to overcome a problem themselves, so they don't get stuck in this language of never. So one of the things that are the types of activities that I've been suggesting to the teachers is this one, where we often get one of the kids to trace their hand on a piece of paper, and at the outside the fingers we put these 5 different kind of domains of their life. So we say, if you had a problem that you were struggling to overcome at home, or if you had a problem at school, I won't do online for obvious reasons, or in your neighborhood, in your street, in your community, or even in your social group. So that could be your sporting team or your band or wherever it is, your group of friends. We ask them to put on the hand, on the fingers, the name of a person that they would talk to and get help from if they wanted help to overcome that problem for themselves. And it's tricky because we put a little rule in place, which is that you can't put the same name on there twice, which presents a horrible conundrum for us parents and teachers when we do this activity, because we're dying to suggest that we can do it for them. We can look over sometimes and see our name's not on there and think, well, I'll help you with that, and it's the wrong thing to do. The right thing to do is to ask them, well, when it comes to help on this, who would you like a better connection with, so that you can get the help that you're looking for. Because we know that having one person responsible for all of those 5 domains doesn't in the long run help that person become resilient, but helps them actually become dependent. I had an example of that, a couple of examples actually. A young person who I was working with who told me he couldn't find a name for his social group. And I went, well, what's your social group? And he said, oh, it's my footy team. Sometimes the boys there are mean, and sometimes I cry and I feel stupid and I said, well, who would you want to talk to about that? And he said, I thought about my parents, but I've already used them. And I said, well, is there anyone else around the place? And he mentioned Mr. Jono, who was our PE teacher, who was quite a known football player. And so what my job was, despite my offence, because I really wanted to be on the hand, my job was to arrange a lunch date, where Mr. Jono and this young man sat down and got to know each other, and where this student could ask Mr. Jono, hey, if I ever have trouble at footy, would you mind if I talk to you? And bang, we've got that name on there. Now, one of the other story that connects to this is that I ran this activity once with a staff of teachers, and asked them to identify the 5 people. And at the lunch break on this special professional learning day, one of the teachers came to me and said, hey, Adam, can I have a word? And I said, yep. And she said, the activity with the hand. And I said, yes. She goes, don't like that activity. I said, okay, I'll take your feedback. I said, what's going on for you? And she said, I'm a twin. And she said, my twin sister is also a teacher, just not in this school. And she said, and we have a deal that one of us texts the other, and when we are about to leave work, the other will try to leave at about the same time. And we get in the car. Both of us drive about 40 minutes to get from our work to our homes in different directions. And we use that 40 minutes in the car to talk hands-free on the phone. And she said, I would talk to her about any of that stuff. And she said, and you're telling me that's a bad thing? And I felt like this is probably not the time to say to her, well, what if your sister got hit by a bus? I think I need to water this down a little bit. And I said, well, let's say your sister and her husband and family take some long service leave from work, and they go and do a 10-week holiday in South America. And for large periods of time, they're incontactable. You can't get in touch with them. And I said, what would that be like? And she said, well, that would be awful. And I said, well, for you, not so much for your sister and her family. So this isn't about saying that you can't have special connections with people. You can't have special relationships, but it is saying that it is useful in times that when people can't be available or they just don't have the capacity to help you, that you've got other people that you can go to in your life. And so this can be a really useful and a really meaningful activity to run with your kids to determine their ability to be resilient. And what we find then is that we can start to progress them through what we refer to as being 3 levels of resilience. I love this picture because it's comes from Fuller again, who speaks about, like I said, resilience is the ability to thrive despite risk. He calls those kids dandelion kids. Says they grow through the gaps in the concrete if they have to. And so what we find is that they can move from a low level of resilience, which means that they're not able to be resilient anywhere. And sometimes you hear them say things like, this is crap. I hate this. This is stupid. And what it is an avoidance strategy, an avoidance of the risk, the avoidance of the challenge. And we've had to work pretty hard with some kids in my history in schools, particularly those who are school avoiders, who school's too hard or school's crap. To be able to help them to step forward. And what we're looking for when we experience low resilience in young people is a little win. So I go back to one student that we worked with who was school avoidant to the point of school refusal and wasn't coming to school at all. And one of the things that mum was going through a terrible time of, really sort of stress every morning of, trying to battle to get this kid physically sometimes into the car to get them to school. And, it was a big argument and a fight and a scream and a cry. And we agreed that this wasn't working and we needed to find another way. And we looked at the research around school refusal and resilience and realized we needed a little win. So what was the first win? For the first few days, all we needed was this boy to get out of bed at the same time as his brothers and sisters and get ready just be there, but not come to school. After the first couple of days, what we got him to do was to get up and to come with mum when she dropped the other kids at school. After another couple of days, we got him to get up, get dressed and get into his school uniform, go with mum, not get out of the car, and drop the others at school. After another couple of days, we got him to get up, get dressed, have breakfast with everyone, put his uniform on, come to school, walk in with mum and drop his brothers and sisters off at their classroom together. And we built up a really slow pattern that took us through, just coming for the first hour of the school day, coming until recess, coming until lunchtime, and it took us a full term. But by the end of the term, we had this young person attending school regularly and for full days. So resilience isn't a matter of just, come on, harden up and go from a really low standard, a really low expectation to a really high one. It's about being patient and supportive enough to inch them across. And then what we start to find is we get young people who we would describe as having medium level resilience. And what we mean by that is that it's context specific. So what happens is what doesn't tend to happen is that a young person becomes a bit resilient everywhere. That doesn't really happen. What happens is they learn to be resilient in their favorite place. So most teachers will smile a little bit about this because most of them have taught particularly a boy who would finish a game of soccer with a broken leg, but who falls to pieces if you ask him to read. And so what he's telling us is that I'm capable. So resilience exists within me, but I can only use it at the moment in my favorite place. I haven't learned to make resilience transferable. And it's only then that we would say that they've got the utility to be called highly resilient kids. It's when they can be resilient in their non-favorite place, in the place that they don't do all that well, where they don't compare favorably, where they don't win. And look, my daughter now is 22, so she'd be horrified if she knew I was talking to you about this, but I was always really proud of her resilience levels at school. My daughter had a difficult birth, and as a result had a little bit of trauma as she was born, which meant that she was delayed in her gross motor, in particular skills. She's got a little bit of a hand tremor as well now, and it meant that she was probably blessed also with her father's genes, not going to end up an Olympic athlete. she's gifted in other ways. You know, she's one of the most voracious readers that you will ever meet in your life. She was reading Harry Potter books when she was 6, and, you know, extraordinary with a book. But I'm not proud of Ebony's ability to be able to devour 3 novels in a weekend. You know, but what I was proud of at school was cross country day. You know, where Ebony, as a year 9 girl, would come out in the morning in her PE uniform. And I'd say, PE uniform, Eb? She'd go, yep. And I go, what's on? And she'd go, cross country. I go, right. How do you reckon you'll go? And she'd go, I reckon I'll come last, but I'm going to try not to walk. And I would say, good work. Because here's what I knew. I knew full well that there were girls at the school, including some of Ebony's friends, who were getting their parents to write fake notes about wellness and illness and time of the month and things like that in order to not do the cross country. And I knew it wasn't true, but Ebony never once asked. Yeah, and she came last pretty routinely, but I'm much more proud of that than I am her only being able to persist when it's in her favourite place. So that's what we're looking for in our young people. And for me, that allows us to sort of return to this concept of how do we get the conversation going. And it is through story. You know, when I go back to resilience hero projects and think about mine, my resilience hero is the person you can see on the screen there, Muhammad Ali, who sadly is no longer with us. It's not the boxing. It's not his favourite place, even though Muhammad Ali won the world heavyweight title 3 times. He's the only person that's ever done that. Asked at press conferences whether that makes him the greatest, he used to say things like, I'm not sure, but, you know, there were people who've held the title longer than me. He would say, I'll tell you what I was, though. I was the world heavyweight champion of getting up. You know, and Ali used to, as people know, was very boastful, you know, had a lot to say about himself and wasn't shy about saying it. But why is he my resilience hero? It's chiefly because he overcame a difficulty that was not to do with boxing, and it was that he was dyslexic. Meant that reading and writing was incredibly difficult for Ali. The letters and words were always a jumble in his mind and in his eyes. And he actually contended that that's possibly why he became such, you know, a proficient speaker. He was overcompensating on the listening and speaking for the reading and writing that he couldn't do. So what did Ali do about that? Well, towards the end of his career, and actually after his career, he said, well, I can't not show the boxing attitude to this challenge. And so he enrolled himself in poetry courses. And in some almanacs, he's listed as being the author of the world's shortest poem, which comes with actions. So it's the actions are me, we, which I think is cute and profound. But if you look at some of the training videos in Ali's, you know, later career of the gyms that he's working in, there are poems plastered up on the wall. And his favourite poem was by Florence Scovel Shinn, a 17th century American poet, who said every great work, every major achievement was brought into being through holding the vision. And often before the achievement comes apparent failure, and it becomes apparent failure. But the greatest achievement in life is not in never failing, but in rising again when you fall. I nearly got there. And it's a poem about resilience. And that's actually something that myself as a principal, I put that poem on the wall, on the door of my office, which was, as explained to my staff, was a message that come to me with any problem. Happy to be the one of the names on one of the fingers on your hand, you know, but be aware that we're getting up. You know, I'm not going to take that problem from you. I'm going to do whatever I can to enable you to be able to solve it yourself. And if I may just finish the session with continuing as I know Mitch Bartholomew will be delighted with this, sharing my interest in sport. Just once more defining the difference between resilience and self-esteem. So resilience, you can't get enough of that stuff. it's really good for you. And our job as parents and educators is to try to maximize the resilience our young people have. But a bit like pride, self-esteem is something that you can have too much of, so don't confuse the two. My self-esteem go-to is a cricketer called Sir Isaac Vivian Alexander Richards, better known as Viv Richards, the master blaster from the 70s and 80s in the West Indies cricket team. And Richard's story that he tells is about self-esteem is really important. He was taken as a 17-year-old on the West Indies men's senior men's tour from the West Indies to England, youngest person to ever be taken on a West Indies tour. And on their first tour game, he was batting at number 3 for the West Indies against a county team that had a fellow opening the bowling for them who was the current England opening bowler called John Lever. He was known for being a pretty fast and fearsome bowler. And he got a wicket for the West Indies with the first ball of the day, for England with the first ball of the day, which meant that Richards had to come in next and face the second ball of the day. And Lever came in and bowled the ball to him, and Richards missed it, and it went through to the wicket keeper. And Lever came down the pitch and said to a trembling Richards, I'll give you a clue, son, it's red. And then he turned around and went back to bowl a second ball that Richards missed again. And he said, I'll give you another clue, it's red and it's round. And Richards placed the third ball and missed it again. Lever had the ball thrown to him. He walked up to Richards, held it in his face. He said, my job is to walk down and run down and throw this in your general direction. Your job is to use that wooden thing in your hand and see if you can get it somewhere near it. Let's see how you go. And the legend reads that that next ball, Lever bowled a bouncer towards Richards' head, to which he played a hook shot that apparently went for 6 over a small grandstand into a train yard. Lever stood there dumbfounded in the middle of the pitch, to which Richards looked at him and said, you know what it looks like, best you off and find it. And it's a great sweary story, but Richards, whenever he tells this story, goes a step further and says what that was about the fact that, because people often ask him, what was going through your head when you were standing there after having missed the first 3 balls that you faced? As a 17-year-old, you must have been, shaking in your boots. And he says, well, what went through his head was that they wouldn't have put me here if they didn't think I was up to it. He said, despite being 17, he said what West Indies cricket had done for him at that point was to put him on a really clear and consistent success challenge pattern, which meant that whenever he experienced success, they put him to the next challenge. And when he experienced success there, they put him to the next challenge. And he said it was like a staircase of success, challenge, success, challenge, success, challenge, where he was never put in a position where there was something expected of him that he couldn't do, even though it was difficult and challenging. And his words are to us that we need to remember this when we're raising kids, and we need to remember this when we're modeling for kids, that provided that we can put in front of them the right level of challenge, our job is to make sure that they can utter to themselves words like, my mum, my dad, my teacher would not put me here unless they thought I could do it. And we want them to persist despite the risk in that moment. The work that we're doing at the school around working restoratively is about intentionally designing for the right level of risk, academic and social, for your kids so they can demonstrate this. Why? Because everything that we are learning about their ability to emerge into a world that is changing more rapidly than it ever has before in the history of mankind tells us that they will need to be resilient. They will need to be able to learn on the job. They will need to be able to try things that not only they've never done, that perhaps haven't been done by anybody before, in order to be successful in a future workforce in a rapidly changing world. There's a really fabulous, if you're into ebooks, or if you'll make a little recommendation to you, a book called, I was about to say What's Wrong With Us, but I think there's another word for it, It's an author called Tim Urban. I'm listening to it on Audible at the moment. He says that if we were to put the history of mankind into a 1,000-word book, He said the world that we would see on page 700 would be very similar to what we would see on page 850. Not a lot's been happening across the whole journey until page 999. And there's been a lot happen. And we have been able to have, as a species up to this point, a high degree of certainty about what our young people will need. We've been able to train them and school them in a certain way for a certain world that's predictable. And no longer. The rate of change, particularly even when you look at concepts like technology, is almost out of control. This resilience piece is the key to them being able to handle a world that's going to be changing quicker than the one that we grew in. And it makes our job around this even more important. I'm really proud of the teachers at Throsby for taking on a way of working that fosters that in young people. And I'm incredibly grateful for all of you for registering, whether you're here tonight in person or whether you're watching this as a video later on. I'm incredibly grateful for you for being people that will step onto that same page with the school. I'm going to finish there and bid you adieu for the evening. I will give the rights to the last word to Anna Maria before we head off. See if this works.
Oh, hello, Adam.
Okay. Yeah.
Look, thanks so much, Adam. I'm always reminded, families, when I listen to Adam, that his wise words always make me think really incredibly deeply about the work that we are doing with your children and with you and with our staff. And our value of our three values of inclusion, curiosity, and connectiveness really, really aligned with our work with Adam. We always approach our children with curiosity and also obviously with being included, an amazing relationship. So thank you again, Adam, and really look forward to continuing our work and family.
On Thursday.
Yes, on Thursday. Thanks so much, Adam.
All right, no worries. Thank you, Anna Maria. Have a good night, everyone.